don't have any time for strategic thinking. The urgent is always crowding out the important. I don't know how I worked all day, but somehow I didn't get anything crossed off the list, right? Have you heard yourself saying these things before? Does this feel like a daily occurrence for you? Well, if so, you might have what I call a sand problem. A sand problem? Like, what am I talking about, right? Well, I want to tell you the parable of the jar and the rocks and the pebbles and the sand. Right? So I want you to imagine this. Imagine that you have a jar, and next to that jar, you have pebbles, you have rocks, you have sand, and these pebbles and rocks and sand, you're gonna need to fill up the jar with them, but they represent things. So the big rocks, they represent your big priorities, like they're your big projects, or maybe it's, spending time with family, like that's a big priority. Like the big rocks, they represent the things that, take a lot of time and that are really important to you, right? So you've got the big rocks, and then you've got the pebbles, the smaller rocks, and these are the kind of medium priorities. These are that expense report you need to get done, and that blog post you need to write, and these are the smaller priorities, right? And then you've got sand. And sand is like all the little minutia. It's all the emails, all the chat messages, all of the little let me just requests that show up in your life. It's just like all the little stuff, all the forms you need to fill out. It doesn't take a lot of time, but there sure is a whole lot of it, right? And now let's imagine you trying to fill up the jar with this stuff. Now, what happens if you pour in the sand first? If you pour in the sand, can you then pour in any of the rocks, the big rocks or the pebbles? No, right? If you fill that jar with sand up to the brim, absolutely not. You can't fit anything in there. Now, what if you start with the pebbles, right? The medium kind of priorities. Well, if you do that, you can then pour some sand in, but there's no way you're fitting those big rocks in. The order in which you want to fill up this jar is starting with the big rocks, right? So you want to start with the things that are the most important, that are your biggest priorities. And sometimes these are the things that take up the biggest chunks of time. You want to fill the jar up with your big rocks first. After you fill up the jar with your big rocks, those big priorities, then you can move on to the medium priorities, right? You can fill it with pebbles, and the pebbles will kind of fill in around the areas, the gaps that the big rocks have made, right? And then you can fill in the sand, right? Now you pour sand on top, and you will be surprised to find you can fit a whole lot of sand in those cracks around the big rocks, around the pebbles. But it doesn't work the other way. And so I want you to think about this from a perspective of your life, from a perspective of your calendar, right? From a perspective of what do you want to fill the time in your days with? Because if you start with the sand, you're never going to get to the big stuff. There is just too much sand, right? There will always be more emails. There will always be more forms to fill out. There's always just so much little stuff, right? If you start with the sand, you're never getting to that big stuff. If you start with the biggest priorities, you will be shocked to find how many pebbles and how much sand can fit in around the edges. But if you start with the sand, there will never be room for all of the other stuff. So when you think about planning for the next week, think about your calendar. I want you to think about, what are my biggest priorities? What are the things that I really want to get done by the end of the week? Or what is important to me in terms of having spent my time? So for me, it's important for me to spend time with family. It's important for me to cook dinner every day. I really enjoy cooking dinner, and my family needs to get fed. I always have a few really important work projects that need to get done, right? I really find it important to spend time on my hobbies. So I need to spend time at the pottery studio. That's my kind of number one hobby right now. And so these are the things that get filled in first, right? Exercise, that's another one that's important to me. These get filled into my calendar first when I'm making a plan. And then it's the medium stuff. What can I fit around the edges? Right? And then finally, it's the sand. It's all that other stuff. Now you may be thinking, yeah, this makes sense. Why are you even making a video about this, right? But I want to ask you, what do you start your day with, right? When you start your workday, what do you do first? Do you open up email? I'm betting yeah, right? Most people do. You open up email, and then all of a sudden you are in your email and you're responding to things, and things are happening, and people are asking you for stuff, and people are pinging you, and they're messaging you. And then all of a sudden it is 6 p.m. and You haven't crossed a single thing off your to-do list, or maybe you've crossed a few things, but not the really big thing that you wanted to get done that day, right? You haven't crossed off the important things. You didn't spend time on the things that you really wanted to. And worse, now you're moving into your evening, and when you really wanted to spend that time with your family or at the pottery studio, now you're having to work late because you're needing to get done those big things that you were supposed to do in the workday, but you didn't make time for because you started with the sand. Right? So what would happen if next week, instead of starting with email, you delayed email and chat? You didn't open up Slack or email until an hour after your workday started, right? And you used that first hour to focus on one of your big rocks. What would happen, right? I am willing to bet that good things will happen if you do this. So are you willing to try it? Are you willing to start first with the big rocks and then let everything fill in between so that you can avoid having what we call a sand problem? Have you been doing this for years and you just want to tell everybody how well it works? Drop a comment and let us know. And of course, if you want this kind of content in your feed, then make sure you subscribe.